All right. I'm excited to have with us on this episode Ambassador Tzvi. Tzvi was the former ambassador to Poland, also the deputy ambassador to London, many other positions, serving Israel for over 41-year career. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me on Israel Unfiltered. How are you doing today?
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be
Awesome.
here.
So the first thing I want to just start is understand is a lot of things we're going to cover a lot of ground. Since you were the ambassador to Poland, you have a strong understanding of the Jewish community in that area, including Ukraine and Russia. We'll get into that. But first, like, what exactly does an ambassador do? What does the day-to-day look like, ambassador of Israel?
Well, the ambassador is the one who represents his country and not only his government, the government of the time, but the people of his country. And actually is supposed to be promoting the interests of his country and of his government in all spheres, to help promoting in any possible way, which means political, first and foremost, international, indeed, economic, cultural, and very important for us as Israeli Jewish ambassadors also to promote the interest of Jewish interest in that country, which means also to be attentive to the needs and to the local Jewish communities in every country. Of course, the Jews in every country are not citizens of Israel, indeed, but nevertheless, and I think this is something unique that maybe other diplomats in other countries do not find it as part of their portfolio. And for us to protect, to promote, to help, whatever possible, in any possible way, the local Jewish community is one of our I would say not only rules but internal need. I mean, any Jewish ambassador, and sometimes, frankly, we have a couple of non-Jewish ambassadors of Israel, but they are also very attentive and trying to help in any way to local Jewish communities. As this is, we consider it as one of the roles of a Jewish state, of the Israeli state.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So, what does your day in, day out look like what does the work of ambassador entail? Like the day to day, is it like how much is bureaucracy, how much paperwork, how much are you speaking to Polish authorities, how much are you involved with the Israelis or Jewish constituents in Poland? How much are you reporting or working with your Israeli counterparts back in Jerusalem? What is like the day-to-day? How much of it is just pushing papers, you know?
Well, of course, as this is also part of bureaucracy, so pushing papers is something that is always required and is important, because what you may call pushing papers is actually to be able to report constantly, genuinely, to your senders at home, to Jerusalem, about the situation, the internal situation of the country, its relations with Israel, its relation towards the local Jewish community. So, of course, you have to push papers of this sort, which are very important for the decision makers in the Israeli government of what to do about the relations with this country or with that country. How does Israel look like? What is the image? What is the situation of the Hasbara, the Israeli Hasbara? It's very important for the government here. So this is a great part of it, and you have to be able to warn, for instance, your political chiefs in Israel about difficulties, how to avoid, how to mend relations sometimes, and so on and so forth. So this is one thing. Of course, now, vis-a-vis the local leadership, of course, it's number one task to be able to form very good relations with leaders of that country, with the government, with indeed the foreign ministry, diplomacy, those who are dealing with Israel directly, and those who are not dealing with Israel directly, but are important for the public opinion in that country, to go and talk to them and tell them about Israel, not only to promote joint interest, but also mutual interest, but also to tell them and to make them interested in Israel, even if they are not so much interested, to be able to tell the Israeli story, the Jewish story, to bring it about to them. Now, of course, you do a lot of speaking. This is the most important part. I would say that the most important thing is really to get to as many people as you can. Of course, leaders, but not only leaders, also to people of culture, to the media, to press and television and opinion makers, right, which nowadays include, for instance, social networks. This is something that we had to learn.
So you even had it to learn it. So as the ambassador,
as a veteran ambassador who's not used to social media at the time, social network, I had to grasp it. I had to absorb it and to use it.
Do you get formal training? Do they give you formal? I'm just curious. Like, people understand kind of like what an ambassador does, right? And I know an Israeli ambassador, like you said, it's different. You look out for the Jewish community. It's different than other ambassadors. I get it. But like, when they're like, okay, you now need to start using Twitter, some social media more. Do you get formal training, or is it just like, how does it work? Like, who makes you start using it, and how does that training look like? And then
we do, and more so in the last couple of years. Now I'm out of the service for the last couple of years, but I know very well that this is taking place, and all the new coming diplomats in the service are really trained very, I would say, very extensively with the social media. Now, look, of course, the general instructions or principles are coming from Jerusalem. They are the ones who are making the decisions about the policy of Israel. But this is the task of every ambassador and every diplomat in every place, to be able to use them the most effective way that suits the local public opinion. Not only the language, to be able to translate it into local languages, but also to mentally to be able to. There is a difference. For instance, there is a difference of how do you bring about messages from Israel to the public, to the general public in the United States.
So you use social. How do you use social? You do that via social media. You're saying that's how you get.
As well.
That's how you started getting. That's how you started getting your message out.
How do you bring it about to a general public in an Arab country with who has diplomatic relations with Israel, and of course the Palestinian question, for instance, you have to be very careful. How do you present it to an Arab audience? In comparison of how do you present it to American, to British, to Western European media and audience. So this is your task. You get the general policy, but you have to be able to adapt it to the needs and the expectations of the local scene.
So they tell you so to understand you correctly, in short, you speak like a bureaucrat, by the way. Is that in short, they tell you, let's say the foreign ministry or something would say, you have to start using social media, and these are the guidelines. And do they provide you with that training, or do you look for people that work within your office to train you?
Both.
Both. Okay.
First of all, they do the training, and as I said, the new ones who are joining the service are definitely being trained very, very extensively. I suppose far more hours invested than they have invested in us, in the veteran diplomats at the time, because the importance of social media is really growing all the time, and one has to be aware of that. And one has to be aware of if we learned to use the Facebook a couple of years ago, and now we are told that young people are only on TikTok. So you have to adapt. You have to not to leave the Facebook altogether, but you have to move on to others, Telegram, TikTok, or whatever. I don't know.Maybe there are a few other networks in some places, but you have to use them. By the way, there are different, also different in some different places. In Russia, there is some other kind of social media, social network. In China, there is something particular to them, of them. Not like in the West. So you have to think about the form of what form are you using, and also the content.
So let's speak about your particular experience. Let's get to Poland, where you were ambassador. So how was your messaging, let's say, different if you were ambassador of Poland as opposed to, let's say, England, as an example? What did you have to do with? Poland, I think, had a Jewish population of 2.5 million before the Holocaust. Very, very, very few now. How much of your work is involved with Holocaust memorial and things like, and what is it? Tell us about the unique responsibilities of being ambassador specifically the Israeli ambassador to Poland, because I'm sure both from an Israeli perspective and a Polish perspective, it is very unique, more than any other probably ambassador.
Yeah, well, in Poland, I have to say that really the Holocaust, the preservation of the memory of the Holocaust was maybe number one issue. Number one issue, not only for the Jewish community. The Jewish community there is not very big. I don't think there are about 15,000 Jews in Poland today, in comparison to, as you said, millions before the war. Unfortunately, 90% of them were murdered by the Nazis. But any place you go in Poland, either you go to the concentration camps, to the Holocaust memorial places, or you go to different cities who were simply Jewish before the war, and nowadays there are no Jews at all. But it is still, remember to go to these places and to remind the local Polish population. Sometimes they do want it to themselves. They want to remember it. Sometimes they don't want to remember that their city. For instance, the city of Bialystok. The city of Bialystok was 60%, 2/3 Jewish before the war. And nowadays there is one very, very kind lady, old lady, a Jewish lady, the only one of the great community of Jewish community of Bialystok, remained only one survivor there. But they are having memorial services. They are having exhibitions about the Jewish life in this town, and how they were, and about the Jewish community before, about the Jewish culture before. And I have to tell you that while, of course, there is also anti-Semitism, one cannot hide it, but there is, at the same time, there is a great sense of interest among the Polish people, the non-Jewish Polish people, a great interest in the life and the memory of the communities that perished.
Why?
Because this was quite an important part of the history of Poland. Look, we have to remember that the Jewish community in Poland survived through centuries before it was distracted by the Nazis. For about 800 years, Jewish communities quite prospered in Poland with difficulties, with anti-Semitism, true, but still there was a reason why the biggest Jewish community in the world was in Poland, up until the 20th century, when the American Jewish community became the biggest one. With, by the way, quite a lot of immigrants, Jewish immigrants from Poland, from Ukraine, from Russia, who went to the West, went to the United States, and indeed prospered there and settled there, and became and for many years became the largest Jewish community in the world. But before that, it was the Jewish community of Poland who was the biggest one. In every Jews, on the one hand, because of anti-Semitism, not always Jews were able to integrate into the society. On the other hand, plenty of Jews integrated into the Polish society as far as culture is concerned. As many as rabbis there were in Poland, in pre-war Poland, there are also Jewish writers who wrote in Poland that are considered as classics, Polish classics. In general, for instance, there were just before the Holocaust, there were 4 Jewish writers clubs in Warsaw. Warsaw was about 1/3 or 40% of Warsaw were Jews. Before the war, 4 clubs of writers. One was Zionist writers who wrote in Hebrew. Another one was writers of Yiddish. Another one was writers of in Polish, Jewish writers. And the fourth one, anti-Zionist Jewish writers. And hardly one visited the other, because they were always in some kind of
sounds like today, right?
Sounds like today, yes. But they were all there. So for Jews to be able to write in Polish was quite natural at the time. So there were Jews everywhere. There were problems, but there were good times, there were bad times. Before the war, times were quite bad before the war. Earlier, they were better. The big pogroms, by the way, did not take place in Poland, but in Ukraine at the early stages of the 20th century, for instance. So they were good. They were good experiences. There were bad experiences, and for many. It's true that many Poles, as many also Gentiles in other countries, were not very happy with the growing number of Jews in their countries. But at the same time, many of them do cherish the memory of Jewish presence. So many mayors said to me that even though they were born after the war, but they said that anyone who knows the history of our town knows how important, how vibrant our Jewish community was before the war, how much the Jews have contributed to our life. In the city of Krakow, the big city of Krakow, also about 1/3 or maybe 40% of the town were Jews. When Jews were transported from Krakow to some camp, and to the camp that has been depicted in Spielberg's film Schindler's List, this camp, and later on they were killed, all of them. So there were hardly any medical doctors left in town, because the majority of doctors, 70%, were Jewish. and also, for instance, lawyers. The majority of there were no lawyers when the Jews were deported from the city of Krakow. Well, about the lawyers, maybe it was not it was not so terrible that there were fewer lawyers, but doctors, Jewish doctors, were gone. That was a huge problem for the town. So that's how Jews were integrated, in spite of all the difficulties, in everyday life, in the Gentiles' life everywhere. So let me tell you something. When I was ambassador there were 13 faculties, university faculties around the country. They taught Hebrew. And I was asking those, some of them were Jewish students, but most of them were not Jewish students. And I always used to ask those students when I met them, why do you learn Hebrew? What is it good for you? To learn Chinese if you want to be in business? No. How many of you are going to go to Israel? They always said it's something else. It's not the how useful it is. This is not the question. The question, we want to learn something about the past. Some Christians said they want to read the Bible in its original language. Some, but others said we owe it. Some said we owe it to our Jewish, to our local Jews who perished, who are no longer here. And sometimes, funnily, in one small town, for one reason or another, they have restaged some kind of a Hasidic wedding. So there was no Jews. There were no Jews in that celebration, and indeed they took a few chusn and kala, groom and bride, dressed them in Hasidic dress. Well, the bride in white, of course, and several others, and tried to dance some Hasidic dances. And in this small town, I don't know how many exactly, a couple of dozens of thousands of people, 5,000 people came and attended this show. 5,000 people. I was asking myself, what is it there? What exactly draws them to this Hasidic Jewish event? Folklore. So it's not only folklore. Maybe some guilt. You know, nobody likes to talk about it, but they were interested. And these, in a small town, probably quite normal people, not very sophisticated, and yet there is some kind of interest like that in the memory of the Jews. Nowadays, by the way, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we here in Israel are having a couple of troubles, political, which are related to the memory of the Holocaust with the current.
Yeah, so a lot of people were talking about that, right?
Yeah.
What exactly is going on there? Maybe you can get people up to breath a little bit about. So the memory of the Holocaust is obviously very important, and the Poles do not. Understandably, or maybe not, I don't know, don't want to take any responsibility for a lot of the atrocities that they've done. Maybe you can speak to that, and then we could also maybe then pivot to the Ukraine. But so what exactly is going on, and is there a way to solve the issue? Maybe you can break it down for us quickly.
Broadly speaking, the Poland considers itself partly as a victim. As a victim, not as the Jews, but as a victim, and that's true. They were the first country to be occupied by the Nazis. Millions of Poles were killed by the Germans, and hundreds of thousands, maybe a million or maybe more, were sent to Germany to work as slaves in rural areas and so on in Germany during the war. So they suffered. They did suffer. Later on, at the end of the war, they were occupied by the Russians and suffered again. So they have a feeling that they are also victims. And there is much to it, indeed. However, the current government is a very nationalistic government in Poland. I will not dwell now on the issue of their leaning towards a not liberal.
All right, let's talk about the part related to the Holocaust.
But about look, Poland was occupied, and yet the biggest number of righteous among the nations, those who saved Jews while risking their own lives, were Poles, about almost 7,500, more than in any other country. Of course, that was the biggest Jewish community in Europe at the time. So the number of savers is very big. But unfortunately, there were many, maybe more than those who saved, who helped the Germans, either by simply giving up Jews to the giving in Jews to the Germans, sometimes while risking their own. I talked to at the time when they were still alive, many righteous among the nations, and they all told me that they were mostly afraid of their neighbors, not of the Germans, because right. The Germans were not there everywhere, but their neighbors, they were afraid of their anti-Semitic neighbors who might give them in to the Germans or to the police. So that's true. Of course, this is not something that the Poles would like to hear about it. But there was always some kind of a sense that, of admission. There were those who saved, and unfortunately, those who didn't save, and even worse in many cases, including after the war, Poles who killed Jews, who tried to come back to some of the little towns and so on, which is, of course, terrible. But we have to remember that the Holocaust was committed by the Germans, not by the Poles. Moreover, the Polish underground, the Polish government in exile in London, told its citizens that they should protect Jews and should not help the Germans in their persecution of Jews. And those who will be found guilty after the war will be heavily punished, and some were hanged after the war by the Polish government.
So where are we? What does it have to do? So where exactly? So what's the argument? What's the disagreement argument now between the Israeli government and the Polish government?
So it came in a kind of a series of events. This Polish current government adopted a couple of legislation that was totally unacceptable by us. The first one was that one should not mention any Polish collaboration with the Nazis, which, of course, totally unacceptable, and even criminalized that anyone as some kind of an incitement or against the great Polish nation. So they changed it. They recalled this legislation. Later on, they introduced another one that prevents Jews from reclaiming their properties. That means they put a kind of a date line until that day. It was possible. Those who have not done so in the last couple of years, that's it. It's impossible. There are all sorts of reasons why they did it. It was not fairly. It was not only against the Jews. It was also about any attempts by Gentile Poles to reclaim their properties before the war. But it mainly hurt the Jews, because Poles, they are citizens there, and it's their problem. But Jews are not there. We, the Jews, left. So it was unfair, and that was unfortunately not solved. Another, and the current crisis was that the Poles have complained about the Israeli youth delegations to Poland. Like, you know, the March of the Living, which not only Israeli students are going to.
Right, I know many American and other students
but
are going.
many Americans.
What do they have? What do they have? What do they have against people going to March of the Living?
Well, what they've been saying, and that was not new. They were saying that our students are coming to Poland, are visiting only concentration camps and Holocaust memorial places, and do not learn anything whatsoever about Polish people. Moreover, they claimed that our students are coming out from Poland with a hatred towards the Poles instead of to the Germans.
Would you agree with the second part? Who cares about the
No.
first part? I mean, no, that's not true. That's propaganda.
That's not. It's true. Look, as we say,
I understand people come and they learn. The Poles played an aspect in supporting the Nazis and extermination of Jews. There were also
no. You cannot say that. Not
okay.
Not
Okay. I'm trying to get clarity out of you, so I'm saying things
personally,
that are very like that. Right.
Personally, unlike other countries, Hungary was fascist, Italy was fascist, Romania was fascist. In Ukraine, they had SS, Ukrainian SS battalions.
They just named a street in Kiev after a Nazi
like the Manure, like the Manure. In Poland, it was not permitted by the government in exile, but people on personal basis simply collaborated. Some of them were punished, most of them were not punished. But okay, also in Germany, by the way, most of the perpetrators were not punished, frankly. But they don't like to talk about it. They would prefer to talk only about those who saved Jews.
I understand that. But my question to you was, are people being taught on the March and Living that are people walking out with a more negative respect for the Poles than before they visited? That's my question.
This is what is being claimed by the.
I understand. I'm asking you if you.
Time.
I'm not asking. I understand that. I'm asking you, in your opinion, in your experience, you would know better than anyone, I would assume. Those go to March and Living. Do they walk, whether it's justifiable or not? I'm just trying to understand. I want to understand where the Poles are coming from. Not that I agree with them.
Yeah. To an extent, there is something. I cannot justify what they are saying, the Poles, but there is something. There is something.
What do you mean something? What is something?
The something is that really, when they go to Poland, they see only Poles around. So, for instance, I personally came across Israelis who went to Auschwitz and told me, tell me, how is it possible that these Poles here who live just 50 yards from the fence, from the camp fence, they were looking at how the Germans are murdering the Jews and did nothing. And I said to them, come on, you think that the Germans were stupid? Of course, no Poles were allowed to live here in kilometers from the camp. Of course, they hid it from anybody. They tried their best. And in any case, even if the Poles would have liked to help, what could be done against the mighty Germans? By civilian population, Polish civilian population, nothing. So to say that they enjoyed it, well, maybe some enjoyed it, that the Jews were taken. Maybe some, and I know many who were very sorry that the Jews were taken. But you cannot. But if you go there and you see the Poles around and you don't see any German. You don't see sometimes the Poles were arguing, why aren't you going to Berlin? This is the real final solution place. This is go to Wannsee, where the final solution decision was taken. Go there. Talk to Germans. Why here? The Germans, they forced on us these camps.
The
They
concentrate,
built
right? No, I understand
camps
that.
here in Poland, but it was not us. That's true. They were not. They were not participating. There were no Jewish service. There were not Polish servicemen in Auschwitz. No, they were Ukrainians, sometimes Lithuanians, sometimes others. Not Polish, not because
So
they were anti-Semites, they were not anti-Semites, but because they didn't trust them at all, the Poles. The Poles, for them, were inferior.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Interesting.
Not as Jews, not to be destroyed, but to be inferior.
I understand. So you're saying, wait, hold on. So let's slow down. I want to get clarity.
Yeah.
So the Poles were not called on by the Nazis in order to do their bidding, generally speaking, because the Germans saw the Poles as less than, let's say, their Ukrainian counterparts. Is that a fair sentence?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. I understand.
The Ukrainians, because of their struggle for their independence from the Soviet Union,
right? They align with Nazis,
and they supported the Nazis.
Okay, so
again, not all of them. There were at least 5,000 Ukrainians who saved Jews.
Right. No, I understand that. Right. Okay. So let's talk about Ukraine for a minute. When you were as being an ambassador to Eastern Europe, did you have responsibilities in a sense to other neighboring countries that were affected by the Holocaust or World War II? You know, Czechoslovakia, etc. Ukraine. You know, Ukraine. And other former Soviet Union nations, or people that were occupied by the Soviet Union, etc. Would you say was there any overlap or like collaboration work with you and other ambassadors?
Yeah, sometimes yes, indeed. Look, of course, everything had to be coordinated from Jerusalem.
Right. I was just wondering if
when I was not in Poland, but here in Jerusalem. So indeed, I've been doing the coordination between all these ambassadors and all these our embassies, of course.
Right. Right. Okay. I was just curious how much did you guys speak to? Okay. So right now the war in Ukraine, right? How much of this? So there's a lot of criticism in the beginning, and one of the big things that Putin likes to do to attack the Ukrainians is he talks about that they're Nazis within the Ukrainians. Obviously, that's not a fair assessment to the Ukrainian people or military, but they do have SS and on the front lines. And Jerusalem Post, I read that they voted to name a street in Kiev after a Nazi collaborator 2 days ago. Erev Chag, during Passover. What's exactly going on when it comes to the Jewish community in Ukraine currently? I'm just wondering if you have a unique perspective, given that you were, in neighboring Poland, the ambassador there, and how much does Israel worry and play a part, or when it comes to combating, let's say the Nazism in Ukraine? And then also, how does the responsibility of the ambassador, how does that play in a war-torn region during war? Let's say hypothetically, I'm sure you'd understand, as you said, you collaborate with them, but like the ambassador of the Ukraine, like what does that look like? How do the responsibilities change?
Look, it's really very, from the perspective of Israel, it's very, very complicated. First of all, obviously, the Russian propaganda about Ukraine being a Nazi state.
It's not a Nazi state. It's all propaganda. I understand that. They're taking a few and some certain Nazis and that, and there are part. I understand that, right? So, but my question is like
a Nazi state led by Jew.
Yeah. No, of course. That's
bullshit. The mayor of the city of Ukraine, Klitschko, well, at least half Jewish. I don't know if it's the mother or father. So that's
right. I understand. From the Nazis' eyes,
they don't care. A Jewish president, that's ludicrous. That's
okay. So let me ask you this. So how does a country that have not a president that has let's say of Jewish origin vote to elect a street after a Nazi this week? How does that happen? how do they do it also while the Russia propaganda machine is trying to make all of, you know, paint all of the Ukrainian government as Nazis, which is obviously ridiculous. But with that propaganda, why do they still go forward with this? Is there any truth to what Russia's saying? Like 10%, 5%, 2%? Obviously, the
No,
government itself is
no.
very far from it. But it's kind of weird. I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, it's all Russian propaganda. And then I see they voted to name a street after it. What exactly goes on in the Ukrainian culture? You gave us a very good understanding of how the Poles see themselves, right? They see themselves as victims. We didn't set up those concentration camps. You're coming here, and then you take this resentment out on us in a sense, and you have walk away with a negative opinion of the Poles. If anything, more positive experiences. We're trying to keep the memory of the Holocaust going. That was a very good explanation of how the Poles see themselves, right, in relation to Nazism and Jews in the memory of the Holocaust. But I don't understand. I'm just so confused. And I know there's so much propaganda from everywhere regarding the Ukrainians. How do they see themselves? And how are they carrying forward? Are they going pro-Nazi as a way to be like anti-Red Army? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. Like, I really don't get it because I'm hearing propaganda. And then I'm like, well, this is true, but this matches with propaganda, but it counters this propaganda. And, you know, there's the fog of war. So I don't even know what's true or not. So I wanted to hear, maybe you can help me get a better understanding, help me become less ignorant, so I can, you know, better navigate all the bullshit out there.
Look, such a problem or similar problem actually exists almost in every Eastern European country. But I don't remember the name of the one street was named after him, but he's considered, rightly or wrongly, a hero that fought also against the Soviets, against the communists, against the Russians, and also killed Jews. On the side, also killed on the sidelines.
What do you mean? No. Wait. One doesn't kill Jews on the side. I'm a marketer and I do podcasts on the side. One doesn't go out of their way to murder Jews and be a Nazi. Not just I don't mean even the regular, let's say, Poles we discussed earlier that might have turned in a Jew and went and killed him on the street or a pogrom. We're talking about wearing a Nazi uniform, SS. We're not talking about just a Jew hater, right? We're talking about an actual Nazi collaborator when it was actively involved. It wasn't on the side. And even on the side, I'm not going to downplay and justify it. I think this is one of the problems, you know, I think when we let these kind of things slide, we can say that we totally support Ukraine in the war against Russia and against the invasion, but we can also say this is absolutely unacceptable. And shouldn't an ambassador of the Ukraine make some kind of statement or do something, or at least pull back their ambassador? Does the Israeli government, is there any communication with them about this? Hey guys, this is not cool, because the enemy is my friend. It's not when you're elevating, when you're immortalizing Nazis on your streets. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to accept that killing Jews on the side as a Nazi is.
Well, they killed mainly Russians. This is their pride, and this is their hilarious position, that they were fighters, freedom fighters, who tried to free Ukraine from the Russian occupation or something like that. By the way,
but he was a Nazi.
They were anti-Semites, and partly also sometimes they considered the Jews as being communists.
No, I understand.
Wrongly, of course.
Wait, the Ukrainians called it when they were anti.
I don't know who named the street. I'm not sure that it's the president who named the street. Maybe it's
no. It was voted for the board. It was voted from the city council.
It happened in
Ukraine.
It happened in the Baltic states, in Lithuania, in Latvia, in Estonia. It happened in Romania. It happened in Hungary. Our good friend Hungary has also been trying in recent years to present those fascist
hold on
collaborators with the Nazis as freedom fighters who tried to free Hungary from Russia.
Hold on a sec. I don't understand. So you're supportive of them naming a street after a Nazi collaborator?
No, of course not.
Oh, because all I hear is just.
And we always tell them that this cannot be used as an excuse. We always
that's my question. Okay, so thank you. So that's what I want to get to. would you, from your experience, has the Israeli government reached out to the government of Ukraine or Kiev to say no? Like, can you please not do this?
Well, I don't know. I'm not in the
I know
government
you don't
now,
know. I'm
but
not from your. I'm
this is
asking
what
from
we
your
have been doing in the
experience,
past. Yes,
right?
this
So
is what we
would
always,
your
on each and every case like that, in every country,
so you're saying there was
we always,
very likely, based on your experience, a back channel of the
yes,
Israeli government
yes.
telling them
And
do
we
not do this or
never,
not do
even
this.
if we could understand the reason why it was done, we never accepted it, of course. In some cases, we were successful in removing those names. In some other places, it didn't work for one reason or another, or the local community was so in favor that the central government was not able to convince them until the new local administration changed, and then there was an opportunity to do it. So, or for instance, there were a couple. I remember that in the Baltics there is a day in March where the veterans are marching. Now, part of those war veterans there, well, they are not, most of them are not alive anymore. So the problem is getting smaller every year. But 20 years ago, the war veterans were marching to commemorate their fight for freedom of their countries. But many of them were former not SS, but groups and divisions who were supporting the Germans. So we always complained. We always demanded the governments to stop those marches. Sometimes they did stop it. Sometimes they said, well, what can we do? It is not going to be very popular step. These are old people and their families, and they consider themselves to be a hero. They fought for our country. Yes, they killed also Jews, but they supported the Germans. But you have to understand, and somehow, well, as I said, in a natural course of things, there are fewer and fewer of them these days. So I don't even know if those marches are still taking place.
Right.
Thanks
Yeah.
God.
Right. Thank God. When back to being an ambassador, were there ever things that let's say with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Jerusalem asked you to do something and you didn't want to or disagreed, or they had an approach or something? I was curious. Are there ever times like what happens when when Jerusalem tells you to do something and you disagree with them? How does that play out? Or was it always like, when you're just like, hey, guys, I'm here on the ground, or you just have your own opinions that might counter that current government's? So I'm curious, how does that play?
The government is the government that was democratically elected by the citizens of the state. And therefore, it is fully capable and able and justifiably taking decisions that we as private citizens may like or may not like. However, it was my duty as an ambassador to tell my government in Jerusalem, look, you privately, of course, this or that decision may be taken very badly here in this country, in Britain or in Warsaw or in Ukraine or in France or wherever, that maybe we should at least here try and present it in a little bit different way. For instance, in a fully democratic country, to be able to present it in the local context. That this is something that was democratically justified. And in a country which is not so much, it doesn't important, and human rights are not very important there. So maybe we should stress some other aspects of this decision. I mean, Palestinians and relations with Arab countries, and for instance, terror. For instance, in London, many years ago, there was quite an issue of quite many people who could understand very well how Israel is fighting against terrorism. Why? Because they had the Irish terrorism at the time in Northern Ireland, and there were bombs exploding on the streets of London. So of course it was much easier at the time to say, look, you are having terrorism, we are also having terrorism, so there is something in common. We are fighting against terrorism. But for instance, if for instance my colleagues in the United States at that time, if they went to Irish communities in America, they had to use some other language. Because the Irish, not everybody, but the Irish community in New York was quite supportive of the Irish struggle for independence in Northern Ireland, and was against against the Jews, and sorry, not against the Jews, but was against the British at the time. So it was quite different indeed. So I would say this is something that you always have to be able to adapt to the local situation, to be able to present. But of course, beyond and above anything else is the political instruction of your government. If you cannot support the decision of your government, then go home. Don't do it. I mean, in a way, in a sense, it's like a lawyer. You have to, but it's not being, one of the sometimes, yes, privately I sometimes thought my government is wrong, maybe wrong, but the criticism that we were facing from the non-Jewish community, sometimes even from Jewish communities, sometimes, but mainly from the non-Jewish, was so strong against not against just the decisions of our government, but actually against the existence of our state. And therefore, I always allowed myself to say, okay, any government may be wrong, may be right, but here we are talking about the existence of Israel. You cannot tell us you must end the occupation, for instance. You must end the occupation. The occupation is bad. Yeah, maybe the occupation is bad, but what is the alternative? What if we are going to end the occupation and we find out that it's no go? That we are facing even harsher terrorism. So, on one hand you have individuals' rights, but on the other hand, on the other side, you have the right of existence of a whole nation. You have to take it into account, and first comes first. Your existence comes first, whether we like it or whether we don't like it. And so it is in every country. In every country, we also are trying to bridge it to the locals with something that they know very well from their own history and local situation, or from their global perspective, from their particular global perspective. That's something that you have to do. But above all, eventually you have to not to succumb, that's not the right word, to support and to be able to do the best with the, in principle, instruction that you are getting from Jerusalem. Because you are the representative of, sometimes people in several places, especially Jews, used to ask me, tell me please, privately, which party do you support? Personally, private. And I was saying, look, no, I don't want it. It's not a secret, but I don't want to tell you why, because you are interested in my opinion, and in my choice, political choice, as the ambassador of Israel, not as Tzvi Ravner, the man, as just a simple.
How do you stop your personal politics?
Sorry?
How do you, let's say, I was wondering, if, and we'll wrap up in a minute. Like if they were to ask you to do something, like how does one like? For me, it's hard for me to imagine do something that I think, let's say, goes against my values or things I believe, etc. Right? More obviously. I could do things for work. I don't think this might be good for the client. It might be the best use for their marketing or their ads or whatever. Right? I might have that. Okay, fine. I'll do it because I need to, or because it's my job. I was told to, etc. But I can voice my concern. Is there a problem when you actually need to implement some kind of policy or a statement or something, and you personally, Savi himself, not the ambassador, felt like I don't feel comfortable doing this. Like this, I don't agree with this. Was there ever a point where you feel like you had to do something to push the goals of the state that counters your opinion? Did you ever have like an internal struggle or like a struggle at all? Or was it, or were your disagreements relatively minor?
Look, no, it didn't happen to me. Didn't happen to me. Even when we had very difficult situations, for instance, the massacre of Palestinians in 40 years ago at Sabra and Shatila, long time ago, but it was something that shook us all. It was not perpetuated by Israeli soldiers, but by Christian soldiers who massacred Muslim. But we were some kind of overall responsible. It was very difficult. It was very difficult. But nevertheless, we had to be able to explain it. And after all, look, our cause is not a commercial company cause. It's the cause of our existence, of Jewish Israeli existence. And we are maybe sometimes not better than other nations, but we are certainly not worse than other nations. And we are trying our best to be also, from the point of view of values, morally better. We are trying, not always successful, but we are trying. So even if we are wrong sometimes somewhere, you always had to, and you always had to differentiate the criticism, the positive, constructive criticism from the very poisonous criticism that is actually the disguise of anti-Semitism. Of course, let me tell you frankly, these days I'm in a way I'm a little bit glad that I'm not in service now, because, for instance, I don't know how could I explain, if it is going to happen, that Israel is going to turn some kind of not liberal autocracy.
Do you actually believe that?
You know that this is a topic that is really dividing us here in Israel. In the last couple of months.
It's a talking point, but it's not like serious. It's all fear. It's
of course. If I
were power and fear, it's all it is. It's not hard to explain. You know,
I don't personally. Now I'm allowed to speak freely and privately. I'm not fond of this legislation.
Okay.
For all sorts of reasons, and I don't think it's a good thing, and I don't think that the government was right in trying.
Okay, I didn't bring up this topic, but you did, so I'll ask you a question. Well, since you were an ambassador to another country, great. So you want to talk about? Let's talk about it. I didn't intend to. You were ambassador of another country. Okay, so you probably understand global affairs and how other countries do things more than most people, I would say, right? What other liberal nation would you think Israel should model its judiciary checks and balances after?
The democracies.
I know. I understand. What country? Every country has a judiciary, and there's checks and balances on them. And I'm asking you, what country do you think closely resembles what you personally think would be good?
I think Britain, for instance. We have inherited lots of our legislation is taken from the Brits.
Okay, so I have a question. Yeah, no, I understand. Right. What checks and balances does Britain legislature have on its judiciary?
The check and balances, of course, is the independence of the judicial.
No. That's not the question I asked. That's not the question I asked. I didn't talk about independence. I asked you what checks and balances. You said you're familiar with the British. You think they do a good model of checks and balances on the judiciary. There obviously has to be checks and balances on the judiciary and on the legislature and the executive. Everyone understands that. You think that the British probably has the best model, should be a good starting point. My question is, I'm not familiar with the British checks and balances to the extent you are, because obviously you're a fan. What are the checks and balances of the British on the British judiciary? What are they?
Well, I said the British because, like Israel, they don't have a constitution.
Have a constitution. We're the only two countries without a constitution. And I'll never understand why I read news in English, and they'll say this was unconstitutional Israeli news. I was like, what do you? There's no constitution.
No, we don't have a constitution.
I know, but it's just the media doesn't know how to report things.
Yeah.
But my question for you is, you want to model after Britain. Great. They don't have a constitution. We don't have a constitution. We're both liberal democracies. My question is, you said we should model our checks and balances based on Britain. What are those checks and balances that they don't have? Please educate me.
But they have independent, totally independent courts. They have
you're not answering my question. I asked. You're not answering.
Upper house.
Ambassador Tzvi, you didn't answer my question. My original question was, what country should we model the checks and balances on? Because you wanted to bring up this topic. I wasn't interested in this topic with you. No offense, because your ambassadorship is far more interesting. So you said Britain. So I asked you, okay, what are those checks and balances on the judiciary in Britain? And you're talking about independence. Independence is important to the extent. Yeah. I'm not saying, I'm just trying to understand your perspective, because you clearly wanted to bring this up. Everyone loves pushing this into conversations that they don't want to have, that are not interested in. So I'll push you on it. That's what I do as an interviewee. What checks and balances on the judiciary in Britain do you support? Tell me, what are they? I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm not saying your opinions are right or wrong. Again, I don't know. Go ahead.
It's the independence of the judiciary.
You're saying there's no checks and
houses.
There's no checks and balances. There's Israel should definitely have two houses of legislature. I agree with that. But my question is, are there no checks and balances on the judiciary in Britain?
There are.
Okay, so great. So you're saying what are those checks and balances? That's my question.
Well, again, this is the independence of the judiciary system. They are not dependent on the government.
I don't think we're understanding each other, because I'm asking you a question, and then as you follow, we're not gonna.
We are afraid that if those
I want to know, what do you think? You're saying I don't know the checks and balances in the British judiciary. You're saying we should model it. So obviously you know it better than I do. So my question is, you're saying they have an independence. That's great. Every branch has an independence to some extent, and every branch has some checks and balances based on the other branches. My question for you is, what are those checks and balances on the judiciary in Britain? So maybe I can say that's a great idea. We should apply that here in Israel. I don't know what they are. I don't follow British judiciary. I know American very well. I grew up there, right? So my question for you is, what are the checks on the judiciary that Britain has that you support?
Supreme Court there may overrule legislation.
Okay.
Without constitution, in spite of the fact that there's no constitution.
Okay, never mind. Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know how to say it. I'll say it one last time. What checks and balances does either the legislature or the executive have on the judiciary at all? Are there any? Or the judiciary get to elect their own people?
In Israel, we do have. Not at the moment, we do have.
I asked you what Britain is. I don't know the British policy. I don't know the British policy. You saying Israel should model its checks and balances on the judiciary based on Britain. I don't know what that is. I'm asking you, what are the checks and balances on the judiciary so it doesn't go full corrupt? And so there's some checks and balances, because every branch should have checks and balances, which you agree with. So my question, and you keep saying independence, and I say independence is great to an extent, but you need checks and balances, because any independent power structure obviously will become completely corrupt if it's totally independent with no checks and balances, and they get to elect their own. So my question to you, because you said Britain has good checks and balances, what are they? I don't know. I'm ignorant.
Well, again and again, I'm sorry, but again and again, the independence of the judiciary to be able to overrule
you're not
laws that are either unreasonable,
unreasonable is subjective,
or are against human rights.
What? Okay, That has nothing to do. That
which
you're
is
not
the
answering the
situation now. This is what and we have been praised, by the way, we have been
All right.
praised by our judicial system has been praised by many judges and experts around the world.
I don't wait, hold up. That doesn't make sense. But of course they are, because there's no check. Every judiciary wants to push the power of the judicial system. Legislatures throughout the world.
No, not the
generally
power of the
speaking,
judicial. No, it's not the power. It's
no one wants to give
it's
up
the
power.
to
No.
protect the citizens. The
Well,
power to
hold
protect
on.
not
But-
the judiciary.
I understand that. I'm not disagreeing. The problem is that you said the checks and balances on the judiciary that you think Israel should model off of, or maybe its starting point for conversation, is Britain. And then I asked you, what are those checks and balances? And then your answer is they have independence. So you're saying you think there should be no checks and balances on the judiciary.
Of course, there is a check and balances on the.
So what are they? What are they? I'm asking you, what are the
And
checks and balances? I
and
don't
we
know. I don't know.
For instance, there is a commission. There is a
Okay.
commission. There's a commissioner.
Uh-huh.
Maybe the role of this commissioner, for instance, should be
Is the
enhanced
commissioner democratically
Commissioner-
elected?
to be
Are they
not
elected?
not
Are they
elected,
are they
by appointed as a judge.
are they appointed by the legislature or the executive branch? Like that's what I'm trying to understand. I don't know. I don't know Britain.
The situation is now
Britain.
that the government and judiciary are appointing judges together, and each one of them has a veto. For instance, and in the last couple of years, the last governments were able, they were right-wing governments, and they were able to appoint a couple of judges that are considered to be judges of right-leaning. But it's according to the new proposed legislation, it's only the government who is going to appoint.
I'm not interested in
judges.
I understand. No, I agree. The legislation goes too far. I never gave my opinion. I think it goes too far to the legislature. I agree. But my question was, you said you decided. I asked you a question about something not related to this. You pushed in your conversation. You wanted to talk about it. You worked it in a conversation. I have a right to push you, and I will. And when I asked you what those checks and balances are, you keep talking about independence. And so it seems like what if the judiciary decides to do something that goes against human rights? Who's to stop them?
The parliament. The parliament.
How?
Well, first of all, it's unthinkable. It never happened. So why?
No. I mean,
the judiciary are not ruling the country. It's the government who's ruling the country. Judiciary have the right to approve or not to approve. And by the way, taking the record here, there were the Supreme Court in the last couple of years had dealt with 1,500 cases of laws, and only in 22 out of 1,500 laws they returned the laws to the parliament because they were inconsistent with the existing laws. That's all. They have not ruled. They have not declared dictatorship. They have not declared corrupted proceedings. They've done nothing. They just simply named those legislators as inconsistent with the existing laws. That's all. And this is, if it going to be adopted, the new proposals, this will be taken away from them. So not only that only the politicians will nominate and appoint judges politically motivated, but they will also have the right to overrule any decision by the Supreme Court. So there is nothing left in such a case. The point, the fear is not that the legislation is going to take over the country. It's not going to take over the country. It was never in that direction. It's the government who we fear, especially that the government is in complete control of the parliament, the coalition. So that will be kind of the three different blocks of democracy will be amalgamated into one. And in Britain is not
So let
in
me
the European Union, but you know, there is Hungary. Unfortunately, we are
hold on.
following
No. We're not
steps of
changing
Hungary
topics.
and Poland.
We're not going to move to
But
Hungary.
then
We're not
they
doing
are
Hungary and
at
Poland
least
because
within
they're
the
not
European
answering my
Union.
question.
They
Well,
are in the European Union, and a citizen who is going to be affected by their judiciary still's got the right to approach the Tribunal of Human Rights in Brussels.
yeah.
Still,
Well, how's
we are
that
not
going?
in the anyway. These are just
Human rights in the European Union has dramatically degraded over the decades. The more European Union is involved, the worse human rights are in Europe. So I don't think going to Brussels, which can have a government because they're a divided nation, by the way, I don't think these are very good examples. But you didn't. But there is a checks and balances.
You have to.
There is a checks and balances.
We are not. We are not so happy with the system, but it was said so many times that, for instance, the Israeli system of appointing judges is far better than the American one, which is
okay. Why?
Totally.
Why?
Because it's total politicization. You
Why?
appoint judges according to their.
How are judges elected in the United States?
And look what happened with abortions now.
Oh my God, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
No, because it's because you're coming because I'm American. You're saying things was funny to me. How are judges selected in the Supreme Court in the United States?
By the president.
No.
By
the president? No.
Okay, but there is.
No.
Yeah, you see. So here's checks and balances, at least there.
No. Hold on. You don't know what it is. But by the way, before you go and claim, you might want to say
the Senate.
Hold on.
But here we don't have a Senate.
Right. Okay. Right. So what happens? The executive branch nominates a president.
Yeah.
A Supreme Court nominates, and then the legislature, right? The Senate, right? Then has to vote a majority to have them join the Supreme Court. So what you have is who chooses the judges, the executive, and the majority of the legislature. So there's checks and balances. That is the American way. There's a lot of flaws with it, a lot, but I see that to be much better than how you describe the British or the Israeli. That seems to have a much better checks and balances. The whole American form of government.
Many experts. I'm not an expert on internet or on Supreme Court affairs, but it's but really on including American.
You brought up a topic. I find you fascinating because you're ambassador of Poland. I think
some of the leading leaders of the experts in law, like for even Alan Dershowitz, who is a good friend of our prime minister, said that what is going to take place here is wrong.
That's fine, Alan. I'm not disagreeing. I've said when I finally shared my opinion was yes, I think this legislation goes way too far for the legislature. It takes too much power away from the judiciary. I agree. But when you go and you start making claims, and I'm going to ask you to back it up, I expect you to know you're going to compare the American system, and you're saying that, and you thought it was just appointed by the president. That's not what happens. You're nominated, and then you're elected on. So it says legislature and executive branch.
Come on, it's by the president. It's by the president.
No, it's not. It's the president. The president chooses.
That's American affair. I don't want to intervene, but
you brought it up.
We don't have a free legislator because
Ambassador, wait. You don't want to talk about it. You brought it up.
By principle,
everything you brought up. You
executive and parliament is the same because the government is ruling only with a majority in the parliament, and therefore the parliament is part of the executive.
So our problem, what I'm hearing from you is, I'm not saying you're saying this. This is my interpretation. So correct me if I'm wrong. One, I don't. That you think the way we currently do elections, in the sense that the legislature and the executive work too closely together by default because we're a parliament in a sense, is a problem. Nothing to do with the judiciary. it seems like if I understand from you, I'm not saying you said this. You didn't say this. This is kind of what I'm hearing maybe by having a lot of conversations. You would like to see a greater separation between the executive and the legislative branch, like America has more. Is that correct?
Yeah, and to be more specific, but this has been mentioned. Yes, indeed, the parliament is has to have a power, indeed, but for instance, it is being suggested by the opposition that instead of some kind of the smallest possible majority in the House to overrule any whatsoever decision of the Supreme Court.
No, yeah, that's too far. By the way, I agree. I agree. You don't have to preach to the choir. I'm just saying.
Not
no,
by
I don't just. I agree with you. I agree with you.
To overrule, yes.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, because judicial system can also be corrupted, and they also need to be reined back, and then you have checks and balances, so they don't go rogue. And then, of course, I agree with you.
Our judiciary has not yet been. We had a couple of problems in the prosecution and attorney general office in the past. Never, fortunately, never with the corruption with the judiciary so far.
Well, no, that you know of. Come on, there's so much hidden corruption. And I'm not saying only because there's no checks and balances.
You cannot say that. There's no corruption found in with our supreme judges so far. Thanks God.
No, I don't mean individually. Like I mean as an organization, they're corrupt. Like the universities in America are corrupted. No individual professor, this guy's corrupt. This is that. As an organization, the university, why there's so much anti-Semitism among the reasons on college campuses in America, there's a couple of them that are economical too. But one of them, anti-Semitic professors are allowed to choose their own professors. So they keep bringing in more communists and more anti-Semites to teach. And then they're bleeding into the whole system and teaching straight up anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Right. No, that's one of the reasons. Yet. I know it's not. What I'm getting at,
the judges do not appoint themselves or their colleagues. It's half and half. We have half of the committee is politicians and half of the committee are judges. Yes, and they have to have a consensus. This is the merit of the system, of our system.
I don't know why. I don't understand why judges need to have any consensus of you. I don't think people should agree. I don't think an organization in an institution of power in a democracy should have absolutely no right to be able to elect or select themselves. That's my opinion. So I think other branches themselves. Branches. Let me finish. Other branches should either be able to have a check on the others, and the voters, the democracy, you and I, should be able to vote accordingly. I want things to be as close to the voters possible, generally speaking. I don't want the rule of the majority, like you mentioned. I don't like that part of the legislation. I think the rule of the majority in general can be very bad, very often. I don't want that.
Look at Britain, the Brexit.
I don't know.
51%. They left the European Union. Have they been right? No, but that was.
Wait, how do you know they're right? How do you know they're right or wrong? You're not British.
Well, I'm not British, but this is what I hear from. I read the British press and I hear what they say. It wasn't a good step. It wasn't a very successful step, to put it mildly.
I mean, maybe. I mean, it's
not a great decision.
I mean, do you think the European Union is a good institution?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Relatively. Listen, relatively.
I'm just saying because
the union. Look, it came. Well, you have to look.
No, I just know people.
Came after the Second World War. That Europe was divided, fighting for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
so
but that's
brought peace and prosperity.
Yeah, but that's no longer relevant anymore. Now it does more evil than good.
I don't think so. You think the European Union is evil?
I think a centralized Europe is worse than a decentralized Europe. That's my opinion. And I know I know people in the UK that said anyone from very poor nations in the European Union, like the Poles, A lot of people were able to come to England, no questions asked, being part of the European Union. They no control over their immigration. They no control over so many laws that was sent to Brussels, to bureaucrats in Brussels, that they have no way to overrule. And even if the majority of Brits wanted to overrule certain law by according to the European Union, they couldn't ever overrule it. So the way to craft out your own destiny is to not be controlled by a bigger form of centralized power that is far away in another country, and so and by British.
Well,
so I get that, right?
that's the talk of
maybe
the
that's
Eurosceptics. Okay, that's the talk of Eurosceptics. But you mentioned Poland. Poland
I use them as an example, as they are a lot of
the
immigrants
largest
of Poles
recipient of financial help from the European Union that helped it after those communist years to build itself, to rebuild itself, and quite to prosper, frankly. Without the European Union,
I'm not.
I said years behind.
I agree with you from earlier on. I'm just saying now I think there's a less use for the European Union. And I believe going forward, a centralized Europe, there's a centralized Europe is not good for Europeans or Israel or much of the world. I sort of saying, of course, it doesn't mean in the day-to-day, there's a lot of good work being done by the European Union.
The Brits left, they can also leave.
Yeah.
Those who are not happy
the Poles won't leave because they're taking more than they give her. They take more than they give.
If the Belgians don't like it, they can leave.
The Belgians want to divorce from themselves. They can't even divorce from themselves.
Nobody.
How are they going to divorce?
They are not bound by handcuffs.
Well, they kind of are. It was really hard for even after Brexit for the UK to leave.
They
threatened them. They were going to make as hard as possible for you. They're going to give you bad trade deals.
Europe is not perfect, but there is.
You make it sound like Europe is perfect.
Social security and health security.
Wait, but who pays for it?
And the human rights situation in the European Union is quite good.
Wait, hold on. Wait. That's not true. There's a lot of slavery. There's a lot of slavery in Europe. A lot of slavery that's turned a blind eye. Let me ask you a question. Where is there more human rights, in Dubai or France?
In France, of course.
Okay. Where is it safer for me to wear a kippah? In France or Dubai?
To what?
Wear a kippah in public. Yeah. Wear a kippah. Yeah. If I wanted to walk around the suburbs of Paris or the suburbs of Dubai, where am I safer wearing a kippah? A yarmulke.
In France, because if you want, I don't want to say anything wrong.
I was just saying. I know. I was just saying.
Our new. No. Listen. Also, in Nazi Germany, the personal safety was okay for the Gentiles, not for the Jews.
I'm not talking about the Gentiles. I know you're talking about criminals. Gentiles. It's better, maybe, but for Jews,
criminals were uprooted. Also, in dictatorship of the Soviets in Russia, criminals disappeared, were sent to Siberia, and the streets were safer. Okay, so we want their systems? No, we still want the French.
No, you just said they had better human rights under Europe, and I would say human right. Anti-Semitism went up 1/3 year over year in France.
And by the
European Union nation, anti-Semitism is crashing in the United Arab Emirates. When it comes to human rights, Europe is on the decline.
The streets of Israel are safer than in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Visitors from the States.
Israel is very up from the States.
We went after midnight, and they were very much impressed by the fact that young girls of 13, 14 years old are walking here the streets after midnight. They are not afraid. Thanks God.
It's really bad in America in the cities now recently, since like the last 5 years.
Nobody's perfect, truly. But okay.
No, I understand. But I understand you're saying, because I'll tell you why. And I, with all due respect, I have these similar conversations with people that are a generation older than me, is that they think of the good of, let's say, European Union as an example. Okay. There's a generational gap. So you think of all the good that European Union has done in the earlier days, as you remember it. Now, someone younger like me, I'm 37. I look at what the European Union, I don't have that memory that you have. I wasn't around and I don't care. It doesn't affect me. But now I see, looks like Europe is coming together to make more bad decisions than good ones. So you have a bias. I have a bias too. I have a recency bias of only considering the things that's been done recently in Europe. And you have a bias more fond to what you remember earlier of all the great things, let's say, the European Union has done. By the way, you could say the same thing for the League of Nations / the UN, similarly, is that they did much great work earlier. Now they do more bad than good they're net negative, in my opinion. And so I think that when you speak to younger people that are, let's say, much more internet savvy, are more familiar with opinions that are different than not only just listening from, let's say, the corporate generic press, but independent journalists, like on Twitter and things like that, that you find out that a lot of people my generation are much more skeptical of institutions that were very important for people of your generation. What do you think of what I just said? Do you think there's some truth to that, or what do you think?
Look, let's leave the past. I'm looking at the current situation, and I don't see in Europe. I see quite first of all very prosperous places. Really, more than any other parts of the world. Dubai is not a good example, with all due respect.
I mean, but that's what I mean, because you might remember Dubai historically, right?
It's not a democracy. Right? I
know shit. It's not a democracy. Of course, that wasn't I asking. I don't live there. I don't vote in Dubai. I don't vote in France. I vote in Israel, right? So I don't care if it's a democracy. Like you said earlier, is human rights. I care about human rights. Democracy is secondary to me too. I agree. Human rights first, democracy second. Democracy is a form of government. What can we do to maximize human rights? A form of democracy is probably the best way. We agree with that, right? But that goes to the recency thing. And it kind of reminds me of, like, I speak to my older American friends in America. I'm thinking of great aunt and uncle in America who they they have this hatred for Saudi Arabia, which I understand. But I'm looking at it as young. I'm like, the last few years, they started to liberalize. They let women drive. They let Israel fly over its airspace. The ties with Israel have improved. They removed some anti-Semitism from their textbooks. I'm not expecting, they're ignorant of Islam and the Arab world. I don't expect them to become liberal overnight. This is tremendous advancement. Therefore, I'm more optimistic and fond, let's say, to the younger Saudi generation than I would be, let's say, of the younger French generation, which is turning more Islamist and communist and more anti-Semitic, as an example. So yes, the institutions of democracy at France are much stronger and more liberal than Saudi Arabia, but looking historically, France 100%. I'm looking the next generation or two, I bet I'll be safer in 50 years walking around in parts of Saudi Arabia that I won't be in France. And I think that's already true now when it comes to parts of the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco. And I think that's going to become, that's why I think that looking at Europe as some kind of special place of democracy is outdated. And I think that's my opinion. And if you want to look to the future of democracy, I think generally speaking, it might be, like you mentioned, Britain or maybe the United States or other places might be a better place to look. And that's why I think as a net, the European Union in 2023, I don't mean in 1983, is a huge net, is starting to lean more negative than positive, at least from the Jewish perspective. And I wouldn't say that was true 10 years ago or 20 or 30 years ago. And I think if you draw it out 20, 30 years, I would assume they will, just like the United Nations, they'll continue to trend more towards evil and less towards human rights.
No.
And I think it's a generational thing. I think it's a generational. That's my opinion.
Jews
I'm saying
prospered always and fared much better in democracies, because democracies were much more tolerant towards minorities.
But there was also in democracies, there was freedom of commerce, freedom of trade, there's freedoms, economic freedoms, and human rights, generally speaking. But not all democracies. Nazi Germany was a democracy. Hamas is a democracy. Not all democracies.
Germany, before the Nazi era, the Jews in Germany prospered extremely well. Extremely well.
Maybe that's the case against prosperity.
And suddenly, when it became a dictatorship, we all know what happened.
Wait. Hold on. It doesn't suddenly. They had the most robust liberal democracy in the world, and they went full fascism. democratically
Yes.
elected.
Yes.
Okay. It wasn't suddenly. Fascism was okay. I just want to be very clear, right? Okay. One doesn't just suddenly the most liberal, democratic, scientifically advanced country doesn't just suddenly go fascist.
So yes, democracies should be aware of the dangers.
Right?
Yes.
No, I agree.
Look, there's no perfect.
I just think it's no. By the way, that's the most important thing. Everyone, what you just said, there's no perfect. Everyone thinks their answer is the best answer. This is the way, and it's not. There isn't. The democracy is still human invention, right? There is no perfect way, and every country does it differently, and every country is flawed, and in their democracy, and ideally we can close those.
And practically for us in Israel, the best solution would be some kind of an agreement between all factions or most
100%.
Factions, simply some kind of consensual agreement on the needed reforms of legislature, but in consensus.
Oh, I agree.
100% consensus, but let's say 70% consensus, 75%.
I
65% consensus.
I totally agree. Yeah, you can easily get to 60%. Yeah, by the way, I think everyone agrees with that. I just think it's fascinating. I think there's like a generational difference because you said some things I hear generally speaking from other people from the generation, and it's interesting to me just a case when it comes to media how I have no intention to talk about the judicial reform, which is now being negotiated with the opposition, which is a good thing. Well, we both agree on that. That people force it into conversations when they don't want to talk about it. It's kind of annoying. What can I do?
Let's hope that something will come out of these talks, and somehow I'm very glad that it stopped at least for a while, because it requires time and thought and understanding and eventually an agreement.
Ideally more understanding.
Opposed. I don't think we are so much opposed here.
No, most people aren't. That's the whole thing. If you talk policy, 80% of people agree on 80%. That's the amazing thing.
It should have not been done in such a hurry. What's the hurry?
That is true. That's true. It wasn't even sold. By the way, it wasn't even sold to the coalition's base.
Right.
I don't think Bibi was allowed to talk about it, but other people could. No, it wasn't sold well enough. It was just
inflation.
We have a majority. Yeah. Let's deal with it.
Yes.
Well, we have a majority.
Anyway,
I agree. That was.
Let's hope for the better. Let's hope for that. Let's not forget that after all parties here, we are talking about the existence of this state, of the only one Jewish state we are having.
It'll be fine. I'm very optimistic, by the way. Regardless of what happens.
That's
all of our underlying factors, I think, the main currents in Israel are very positive, very bullish. I think for everyone in Israel by far. I'm not worried. I think everything will be fine. Because I was telling a friend of mine who opposes the judiciary reform stronger than me. I said, there's more than enough people for next government to roll back the things that you disagree on. Let's say like we're saying, the legislating being able to overrule with a majority, so a simple majority, as opposed to, let's say, a supermajority of 70 or 2/3 or whatever. Like I agree with that. That would pass overwhelmingly in the next coalition.
Yes.
Like it is. So like a lot of these things that are like barely, you can probably peel off 1/3 of the coalition to roll back a bunch of those things easily. It's not a problem. You know what I mean? That's why I'm optimistic. I was like, it will fix itself. There's a pendulum. You know what I mean?
I do believe so too.
Yeah, that's why. And everyone's like, I was like, even if no one did and it went through, and then we'll come back and then they'll roll back all the things that weren't. And I think we'll be at equilibrium. 80% of people agree on 80% of things. And that's why I'm more of an optimist, and I'm not a doomsdayer.
Me too.
And democracy.
Well, you didn't give off the government to defeat the other side. No. I think.
Well, you didn't give off that vibe earlier. This is the first.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, last question. This question's for me. Okay, I was curious. How does one become an ambassador? What's that?
Very simple. Well, personally,
and then we'll wrap it up.
When I graduated from university, actually even before graduation, I applied to the Foreign Service. I had a couple of. We all had. Frankly, there were a couple of thousands of applicants, and they chose about 30 of us to become diplomats. I underwent
Wait, what does that mean? Does it,
2
when you
years
say diplomat,
course.
wait, hold on. Wait, there's like a job opening to like become a diplomat. A few thousand apply, a couple dozen are accepted.
Yeah. Yes.
And could anyone apply to this? Like I can apply to, you were
Yes.
just a private citizen?
Well, of course, graduates, university graduates.
Okay, so you need to have did you need to have a certain degree in diplomacy?
Yes. You have to have a degree. Yes.
Specifically in diplomacy.
No. We no. It's not like that. All sorts of faculties. We even have.
Is it still true today? You need to have a college.
Yes.
You need to
It's
have a
open
college
to
degree.
Everyone. Well, we even had a. We even
It's so
have
it's so
dentist.
outdated.
An ex-dentist became a diplomat.
It's so stupid.
Yeah, but then
It's
you
classism.
have
It's
but
classism.
then you have to take no. You can't have only those who went to who studied the international.
Yeah, but what if
politics
someone
only.
stayed in the army? Obviously, I know this isn't your policy. I'm just trying to
The
understand.
examinations
If I
are
was in
for
the
everybody.
army for 15,
Of
20
course.
years and I served my country, but I never went to the university system, which is corrupt and outdated also, like the EU. Do you think we should like they won't accept you? You can't apply? Because you have a college degree?
No. You have to be a graduate. I don't know of any. Look, it happened at the early days of the country when people really came out of the Holocaust, and then they came to Israel, and there was the War of Independence, and there was no time to study. There were no places to study, and so on. Then yes, people were admitted to the service without the degree.
Why did they add it? Why did they add it?
It has changed. Nowadays, even the first degree is sometimes insufficient. You have to have a master's degree in most cases. For
It's
instance,
like a drug addiction. You need more to get high. It's like
that's everywhere.
you don't need any.
Listen, it's everywhere in every State Department and foreign office.
I don't think that's true, but I think that will go away.
Why? I have to tell you. Listen, it's. I think it's one of the most interesting jobs.
For sure. Yeah, I'm
life.
curious. That's why I'm curious how you. I'm for sure. I would love to be an ambassador to America.
Yes,
I dropped
because
everything.
you are dealing with so many things. You are familiar with economic affairs because you have to help businessmen to promote, to export, and so on. So you have to learn. Cultural. You have to be, even if you are not the most cultural person, but you have to promote to help Israeli artists to be able to perform abroad and so on.
Why do you need a college degree?
Political and consular affairs, and what is consular?
Why do you?
Is human rights, and you have to learn everything, and then you go to a country and you're really trying to absorb it and to understand it as much as possible. So it's to go deeply under the surface of this country in order to be able to promote your interest and to be able to advise your government. So it's very interesting. And there's no other chance to meet some of the greatest of the world. Otherwise, really.
No, I agree. It's awesome. So
how
could
I meet? I met Mrs. Thatcher, for instance, on a couple of occasions.
Why didn't you talk about that? I want to hear more about that. I wanted to talk more about your ambassadorship. Well, fortunately, we didn't get that much time. So if I have a college degree, I have an MBA also. Can I apply to be an ambassador?
Yes. Yes.
But they won't accept me.
Any subject you have.
What would it take for them to accept me how does one apply? Aren't they appointed by like the executive branch, the prime minister's office?
No, it's by the Civil Service Commission and the people of the Foreign Ministry.
Can you help? Can you help me become an ambassador?
It's not a political.
No, that's good.
Officers, political officers too.
Right.
And each government has
one
the right to appoint a certain number of ambassadors.
Ambassadors
are civil servants.
Whoever donates the most to that
that's in America.
Party,
that's an American system.
That's terrible system. It's absolutely
well. I mean, sometimes it is.
I mean, I understand there's pros and cons to it, and in a sense, there's politics and all that, but it's not the best system. So, if I were to I go to a website, I apply. I want to be the next ambassador to the United States. and they'll never look at
Well,
it.
of
So it'll
course,
happen.
question number one, have you served in the Israeli army? This is very
No,
important.
I have to serve in the army.
Unless you had a good reason. I mean, health, for instance.
I made Aliyah when I was too old.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good reason.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe
I made
it's
Aliyah
not,
9 years ago, 10 years ago.
it's not a topically strict rule, but
Right.
of course you have to pass also a security test.
That's fine.
That's as well, of
I
course.
was going to find out when I was arrested when I was a teenager.
Yes. So yeah, there are, but it's open for everybody, for every citizen. Nowadays, it's when I joined the Foreign Office, the age limit was I think less than 30. Nowadays, it's gone. It's nowadays from time to time I'm sitting on those committees who are examining the applicants. I mean, those who are the final applicants, not the thousands. But we even had some while ago a lady over 50 who decided to that she wants to become a diplomat, and she was accepted. She was admitted because she was very good. And of course, you may say, all right, and now we are going to teach her 2 years, and what's left for service, another 15 years, another 16 years, and that's all. But yes, she is good, and that's the law. That's the law. As much as, for instance, we have to prefer women, for instance, or Ethiopian Jews, in order to uplift them, and so on and so forth. But eventually, it's a matter of merit. Eventually,
right. Well,
it has to be.
Excellent. If people wanted to follow you or anywhere, is there any way they can keep in touch with you or being?
Please.
How can they? Is there a social media where you're active? How would they be able to reach you?
Maybe to write to me.
Okay, lovely.
We'll
put your email in the description for anyone that wants to be in touch with Ambassador.
Okay.
Ambassador Zvi, this was fun. I enjoyed this. I love when you got lively when you talked about the European Union.
Yes.
I think there's an interesting generational gap between us that I see some threads with other conversations that I have. And it's very, very fascinating job being an ambassador, particularly in Poland. It's a lot of balancing of egos and a lot of pride. That's very important that you have to
highly recommended.
Highly recommended. Lovely. Thank you so much, Ambassador. It was an absolute pleasure having you on Israel Unfiltered.
Welcome. You're very welcome. My pleasure.